I hope you all able to see the presentation. Type yes in the chat box. That yes, you are able to see the presentation. So as a part of this, we will talk about the 8 different points. The first one is what is skip testing or periodic testing. What are the strategies one has to adopt while considering the skip testing approach? The reduced testing proposal, reduced testing for drug product or APIs or raw material excipients, packaging materials. In case if the batch gets failed, what is the the action plan you must adopt? In case if there is a process change by manufacturer for already approved reduced testing product, what are the points you must consider? And the last one is the change in specification for already approved reduced testing product. So these are the 8 important points that we are going to discuss today. So as per as the skip testing is concerned, ICH guideline Q6A has given the clear guidance onto the skip testing part. And let me read that guidance as such for your understanding. So the specified test at release on pre-selected batches and or at predetermined intervals rather than on batch-to-batch basis, with the understanding that those batches not tested should meet all the acceptance criteria established for that particular product. So this is the guidance given by the ICH guideline Q6A, which is for this specification. So what are the points one has to consider? Or before I move on to the detailed discussion, let us further break this definition part. So ICS says that you need to assess the risk. You need to identify which are not the critical attributes. And those attributes probably can be skipped from testing from lot to lot. So the defining the how many lots after which the parameters needs to be tested, or what parameters can be skipped off. So those details are the part of the today's presentation. So having understood the definition part, let us understand what reduced testing is applicable for in-house product, how we can implement this guidance to conduct the reduced testing for the vendor source material, and what are the parameters, those can be skipped for the routine testing. And when it comes to the detailed presentation, probably I think there may be some points where your organization have different practices and procedures. Your product's critical quality attributes may be different from what I am talking today. So all those differences also needs to be discussed very well. And we need to have a flexible approach in going ahead with this skip testing. So for one product, the water content may not be very critical, but similarly for another product, it can be highly critical. So based on to the actual best product to product, you need to decide on to the skip testing. So it cannot be a generalized statement for all the products. It cannot be just followed, as per the strict guidance, but you need to assess the criticalities, and based on to this particular guidance can be implemented. So in case of in-house product, how one can implement the reduced testing. So let me open up the discussion for this point. So you need to conduct the skip testing onto the pre-selected batches based on to the assessment. So before going ahead with the entire skip testing proposal, beginning of your annual production meeting, you need to declare that, in case if these are the number of batches that we are going to manufacture, let us say in this annual year, we are going to manufacture 200 number of batches. So out of this 200 number of batches, after every how many number of batches, the product will be tested for X, Y, Z parameters. So for every 20th batch, you are going to test a batch for complete testing. And for all those initial 20 batches, the test number X, Y, Z will be skipped. So this must be well in advance, right? It cannot be based on to your wish. It must be a well-defined into your annual manufacturing plan. Now, identifying the attributes that are candidates for the skip testing. it is also important, once you identify the number of batches to be skipped off. Now, what are the parameters that you are going to skip? Is it a microbiological testing? Is it a water content, disintegration time? So what are those parameters that you are not going to test for the skipped batches? And you need to assume that these parameters are non-critical quality attributes. You cannot have the skip testing for the critical quality attributes. And that's where I said that the critical quality attributes can differ from process to process, can differ from product to product. Now, this reduction is justified as there is a low risk of any batches failing specification. So what is the assumptions you are making? That yes, we have a process in a place, control in a place, which are going to make sure that those skipped parameters will not go out of this specification. So this is the underlying understanding. This is the assumption based on to we are going to make the skip testing planning. So we need to have a solid justification, how you are going to minimize the risk, how you are going to say that, look, for water content, this product is not going to go out of this specification. For disintegration time, this product is not going to get out of the specification. And there must be a scientific rationale for your justification. And what points can be considered? Let us have a discussion on to the 5 different points. So you have made a budget of the skip testing. Now these are the 3 tests will be skipped off and will not be tested for each and every batch. So what is the justification? Alternative measures which are in place to control the quality attribute if it is no longer to be confirmed through testing every batch. So what is the alternative control quality attributes you have? So those control attributes can replace the requirement of testing that particular parameter. So what is the example of that? For example, in case of, you have a class 3 residual solvents, for example, isopropyl alcohol. Now, isopropyl alcohol is controlled at a limit of not more than 5,000 ppm. Now, you have a process in a place which also talks about the loss on drying testing in process parameter. And in case you confirm that my loss on drying is less than 0.5%, that can substitute the necessary of testing the batch for the isopropyl alcohol content. Now, this is called as what? The alternative measures. You are not testing the API for or a product for the isopropyl alcohol, but you are going to test it for loss on drying. And loss on drying of less than 0.5% will also confirm that the isopropyl alcohol content will also be less than 5,000 ppm. So in this case, in your case, if this scenario exists, then you can certainly go for skip testing for your isopropyl alcohol content. Scientific rationale which shows that the quality attribute has a low impact on safety and or efficacy. And that is what we call as a non-critical quality attributes. Now, this is not the very critical parameter, but it is nice to have a parameter. We need to implement those parameters as a part of our specification, but they are not much critical. Now, what are the example of such critical parameters? You can think of, let us say, there are 4 different identification tests needs to be conducted. But out of these 4, if I confirm the 1 and 3 is meeting the specification, then 3 and 4 is not really necessary. And you must have seen many monographs wherein there are 4 different identification tests given, but either 1 or 2 is required. So as long as you are meeting the 1 or 2, then 3 and 4 is not a necessity. So based on to this monographs requirement, you can always go ahead and skip the few of the attributes which are not really important. Not important in the sense that they are not critical per se. Now, scientific rationale supported by risk assessment, which demonstrates that the attribute is not critical to quality. So I think it is again about the mentioning about the non-critical quality attributes. And it can be, let us say, disintegration versus dissolution. It can be versus LOD versus the residual solvent content. So identify which is more critical, which is not more critical. And based on to that, if you feel that dissolution is more critical than disintegration, you can think of skipping of disintegration test parameter out of your study parameters. In case if you find that, okay, the isopropyl alcohol content is not much critical, as my loss on drying is going to take care of that. If you see that, okay, the water content is not much critical because my drying process is such efficient that the water content is always going to remain within the specification. So understand what is the logic behind saying that these are non-critical parameters and why they are not related to the product's performance or the efficacy. If justification of skip testing intervals and batch selection, where selection should be made randomly within each interval. So it has been said that you cannot select these batches for skip testing according to your wish, but you need to have the proper interval and batch selection done before you start manufacturing those batches. The process to be followed if a batch selected for testing fails to meet this testing. So what is the process you have in case if the batch selected for testing fails to meet the specification? Now, this is something very serious situation, and we'll talk about this particular point in the coming point. So this is what justification you can give for availing the skip testing for your product. Performing a statistical evaluation to confirm that there is a low risk of batch failure. Now, when it comes to statistical evaluation, it's again dependent on how many number of batches you have and which statistical model you want to implement. Now, this concept may be applicable to, for example, a residual solvent, microbiological testing for solid oral dosage forms, and we'll also have a list of parameters or the test for which the skip testing approach can be used. It is recognized that only limited data may be available at the time of submission of an application. Now, this concept should therefore generally be implemented post-approval. So it is not a good idea to implement this concept during the product development or your development stability. You need to completely develop all methods for required specification parameters. Also conduct those testing parameters throughout your development phase. You do not skip those parameters during the stability. Now, this is why, because you need to gain the confidence onto the product performance. You need to understand that how the product behaves throughout the different stages of the product's development. So get the data and then add the application of your ANDA. Now you will not have the sufficient number of batches in the hand. So it is implemented preferably after you get the approval. And it has always been said that you need to also inform to the specific regulatory bodies about your skip testing proposal. You cannot just make the risk assessment done, prepare the protocol, and then start skipping the parameter or the number of batches. You need to get it prior approval from the regulators, and then only you will be able to implement the skip testing plan. Applicant should specify which tests are routinely conducted batch by batch and which tests are not, with an indication and justification of the actual testing frequency. So all the details about the number of batches skipped, about the number of parameters skipped, need to be well explained into your proposal. Now, skip testing may be an appropriate approach in both release and shelf life specification. So it is not only applicable for the release, but you can also consider the skip testing for your stability batches. Now, data generated during product development may be sufficient to justify periodic or skip testing. So in case if you have a suitable number of data, which can be statistically evaluated, then that data, based on to that data, you can propose the skip testing into your actual manufacturing. Now, this is all about the reduced testing for in-house product. Now, what is the proposal you must have for the vendor source material? So in case of you are sourcing API for manufacturing of a drug product, you are outsourcing excipients, you are outsourcing solvents for your manufacturing of the product. So for those products, you can also apply the reduced testing approach. So let us understand what are the details one has to consider. You need to, though you are applying the reduced testing for your the vendor source material, you cannot completely ignore and neglect looking at the product's quality. So conduct a visual inspection as per as the container's condition is concerned and the labeling details are concerned. We will talk about what are the conditions, the prerequisites for to get the reduced testing for the raw materials. But this is what, once the raw materials gets received at quality at your manufacturing site, then these are the details the QA expect to QC do. So inspect the individual container as per as their condition and their integrity and the labeling part is concerned. Conduct one identification test at least to understand that whatever raw materials you have sourced, received is actually one and the same. Conduct critical test if any, in case if you found that, okay, so I am receiving the, let us say, HPMC as a raw material. And I understand that for this particular HPMC lot, let us say the hydroxypropoxy content, propyl content is very, very critical. Or for this povidone lot, the content of peroxide residue is very, very critical. So I need to select that, based onto my product design requirement, which parameter is really critical for me, and those critical parameters needs to be tested. So again, this is the guidance, may differ from organization to organization, and I completely understand the differences and the different of opinions. I always welcome, all of you to talk about how you conduct the skip testing the moment we complete the presentation. So in case of you want to avail the skip testing for the vendor source material, first 3 lots of API, your raw material excipients must be tested and must meet the specification. Now, what is the logic behind testing 3 lots? To understand that there is a consistency in each and every lot. So this number can differ. It can be 3 for someone, it can be, let us say, 20 for another. So understand the concept that you need to first identify the the continuity as per as the lot's quality is concerned, or the API's quality is concerned, or whatever raw materials that you are going to apply the skip testing. So understand the quality, consistency. Skip testing can be continued from then 4th lot onward. So in case if you are selecting the 3 initial lot will be completely tested, and onwards lots will be applied for the skip testing. So the skip testing, the frequency is another very interesting topic of discussion, and I'm sure that you are going to have your own voice also. So there is something called as a root n+1 rule, and sometimes the people always prefer to use this rule for the skip testing. But if you look in the details of this particular rule, I don't go completely with this rule, but the rule was developed for skip lot testing where it is lots within a batch. So in case if you have a manufacturing of a product for which 20 different lots are manufactured, and the moment you get a 20 different lots, then you are going to make them combine and going to manufacture a single batch. So for this approach, a batch manufactured with a different lot approach, this root n+1 approach was used for the skip testing. Now, what is meant by root n? The n stands for the number of lots manufactured. For example, if you manufactured 9 lots as a part of one batch, so root n becomes root 9, that is 3 plus 1, the 4. So the 4 lots will be tested out of all 9 manufactured lots. So this is the approach. So you can think about, the better approach. The reduced testing is acceptable only if now. So this condition is important, and you may have your set of conditions, because this is the product you have received from the vendor, and you have tested the required number of batches. So manufacturing site is approved by QA. Your QA must confirm that whatever manufacturing processes they are using meeting the GMP requirements, and the approval is, audit is successfully completed. Now, critical methods like assay, RS, etc., are validated by vendor, right? In case if there are certain parameters which are really critical as far as the product's performance is concerned, then you must also confirm that those methods are suitably validated by the vendor. Method of analysis of vendor and company is one and the same. So you are also going to use the methods submitted by the vendor with the probably suitable verification or analytical method transfer. So this is very important point. Trend must be evaluated in comparison with the manufacturing results. So as you are going to build the data, or for the initial 3 batches of the data, you must also understand whether the results of yours and vendors are within the trend. Approval from respective regulatory authority must be taken before implementing reduced testing. As we discussed in the opening session as well, you need to take the pre-approval from the respective regulatory authority before you implement the reduced testing plan. If manufacturing site is not audited, approve vendor through audit questionnaires. In case for certain reasons, the way we gone through the COVID pandemic, the actual physical auditing was not possible and feasible. So for that reason, you can also send your questionnaire and conduct the audit through the virtual visiting the required manufacturing locations. Now, what are the parameters you can test? You can conduct. You can consider for skip testing, and these are the parameters. And again, these are just the example, like microbial limits, rheological properties, then reconstitution time for injectables, water content, functionality testing of delivery systems, osmolality, then redispersibility for injectable suspensions, and reconstitution time for parenteral products. So the list can be extended based on to your assessment, risk assessment criteria, but these are just few examples to understand which parameters can be skipped off. The second important point is now the skip testing strategy. So let us understand what are the steps that we need to consider before reaching to our decision that yes, now these products and this test can be skipped off. So there are 4 steps one can consider as a part of evaluation before taking a decision on to skip testing. The step number 1 talk about selection of attributes via risk assessment. So let us understand, what are the attributes and what are the risks associated with them. Now, only attributes them low risk will be considered for skip testing. So, for example, there are 3 attributes which you feel are not critical as per as product's efficacy and quality is confirmed. Then you can decide on to skipping the test for these 3 parameters. So what is the guidance as per as skipping the parameters? And this is a risk assessment session now. You are going to assess the risk, and the tools can be used appropriately according to your wish. So impact of not testing a batch that fails specification, like patient outcome, quality, yield, batch, recall strategy, etc., need to be assessed. So for example, you are saying that the water content is not critical for this one product. But in case if the water content gets failed, what will be the impact of that product onto the patient outcome, onto the quality of the product, or yield of the batch? So all those details must be well assessed as a part of your skipping the water content testing. Then related tests like the ability of an alternative test that will perform to predict the skip test. So in case if you're not conducting the water test, but you have the alternative test, which is going to say that as this parameter meets the specification, my water content must be within the limit. So those secondary performance test parameters needs to be part of your testing so that you will have some rationale for confirming that yes, my process is working well and the water content will be within the limit. A strategy is in place to control the attribute, implying that an out of control process is not expected. This is called as your design, right? The process validation. So you have conducted the process validation, and according to that, you have challenged certain parameters. And against that challenge studies, you have met the required specification for water content. So based on to that, you have the robust control strategy in the place. That also gives the confidence to you that there is a very minimum risk going ahead with the skipping water content. What is the historical knowledge you have about the product? See, this is not the first time we are discussing about the water content for product X. Your R&D team is having vast experience about the product X and the water content testing. So what is the historical data? What is the impact of high water content, low water content onto the product performance? How many experiments were conducted and what is the outcome of those experiments, water per se? So those historical data is also going to help you in assessing the risk, not testing the water content. Now this is the step number one, that we are going to talk about each and individual parameter and the risk assessment of those parameters. Then the step number two is assessment of the attributes. Now, candidate attributes are assessed to confirm the process is under control for that attribute, that is, there is little or no evidence of spatial cause variability. So that particular attribute is not a critical quality attributes. And we have studied based on to higher content of water, lower content of water, and there is no any such failure in the products observed. So this assessment of attribute as per as products quality performance is also needs to be assessed in step number two. Now separately for each attribute, a statistical assessment of the process needs to be done. Now the statistical assessment can be in terms of understanding the result for that particular parameter batch to batch. So in case of you have historical data, and if historical data says that all the results are within the plus or minus 2 sigma region of the mean value, that also confirm that the process is very robust, and based on to this there is a very little variation observed for the result. An assessment of the process performance and process capabilities also needs to be done. So you have the process validation done, and the process validation is also going to help you in understanding that how this quality attributes is going to stay within the specified limit, even though I'm not going to test for each and every batch. The third step is going to be a routine application of the skip testing now. Now, if the conditions described so far are satisfied, then skip testing can be implemented. So now the skip testing implementation plan must have the number of parameters which can be skipped off, and what is the frequency of the testing, whether every 20th batch, every 30th batch, or every 40th batch is again dependent on to the number of annual manufacturing. And then the change control must be raised. Based on to the change control approval process, you need to also get the approval from the regulators, and then this action can be implemented. So this is about the skip testing strategy. Now, how the proposal can be made? Let us understand the management of the proposal. You are going to make a proposal now and must have the unique identification number, because this is going to be a very, very critical document. As like we have a skip the identification number for any quality management systems. Now QC shall prepare a proposal for reduced testing. In your case, it can be a quality control, or it can be manufacturing or quality assurance. But as the quality control is responsible for testing of the product, The quality control becomes the more appropriate function to raise the skip testing proposal. Now, trend analysis for material under proposal must be made. So what is the information you must include? The trend of the data. So for example, you have a 200 number of batches so far manufactured, and you must be having now very good amount of data for establishing the trend. So based on to the trend data, one can build a very strong reason why this particular test parameters can be skipped for every, let us say, 20 numbers of batch. Now, approval from respective regulatory authority must be taken before implementation. Your QA has approved, that doesn't mean you are free to skip the testing. You need to forward this approval to the regulators, and upon the approval from the regulators, you can start implementing the skip testing. Now, QA must be final authority to approve the reduced testing. So as far as your organization is concerned, the QA has a final say about your proposal, whether this particular test can be skipped or it cannot be skipped. The point number 5 is reduced testing now for the raw materials, APIs, and excipients. So let us understand what is the exact procedure one can follow. Now select latest analytical data of not less than 10 consecutive lots in a year. Now this is for what? In understanding whether there is a reproducible results and consistency lot to lot. So I understand the 10 consecutive lots, and this number again is not something which is fixed. It's again dependent on two organizations. So how many lots you are going to assess for the data suitability, whether the results are reproducible, whether the lots manufactured are within the trend. So not less than 10 can be a good point as per as lot selection. In case if analysis data for 10 batches is not available, then conduct complete testing of 10 consecutive batches. In case if you do not have the data for the 10 batches, then you can think of testing the product at the given point for the 10 consecutive batches. It is not the random batches, but for the 10 consecutive batches to understand that, yes, the process is very, very consistent. Now compare the data of vendor and lab proposing reduced testing. So in case if you have a your data in the hand, and I'm sure you must be having the vendor's data in the hand. So understand the result of each and every parameters and comparable. The data, if it is comparable, then you have a strong point to go for the skip testing. So reduced testing can be permitted if comparable results are found. Now, upon approval of reduced plan, propose minimum test to be conducted. So what are the minimum tests you are going to conduct? And so, yes, so at least one description is mandatory, at least one identification test that will confirm and give a confidence that whatever you are getting in is actually the same raw material. Then the LOD or moisture content or water content, assay, RS, and the micro. So based on to the criticalities parameter, you can think of these are my 5 points which are still going to remain the part of my testing plan. Now conduct the testing as per approved reduced testing. Example, every 20th batch. So every 20th batch, I have seen many organizations are using, but again, it is dependent on to your system. How many batches you are going to skip? If let us say that the annual manufacturing plan is only 20 number of batches, then probably the frequency needs to be increased. But in case if you have a plan of 200 number of batches annually, then probably the 20th batch can be a suitable idea for skip testing. Now, the important point is in case if the batch failure after implementation of reduced testing plan is observed. So you have implemented the reduced testing plan, and you have found that now this batch has failed for the critical parameters, or even during the skip testing for actual, you have the 20th batch tested for the skip parameters and that parameter got failed. So that is something very serious, and you need to raise an OS according to your OS procedure. In case of valid OS, reduced testing program must be suspended, and the QA has to investigate. In case if there is a really a strong reason that probably this parameter cannot be skipped off, then the skip testing plan can be suspended very immediately. All previous reduced testing batches shall be investigated for suspected result. So for example, if microbiology was the skipped parameter, so you can think of analyzing those skipped, those all batches for the microbiological evaluation. Subsequent batches of API shall be tested fully. Then whatever batches you are going to manufacture after that must be tested for the complete testing parameter. And QA shall conduct a vendor audit in case if QA feel that there is a strong reason to revisit the manufacturing facility of the vendor once again. Notice the process changes in case if you have a reduced testing plan done, but now the manufacturer has changed its process. So in that case, what you are going to do? Conduct a complete testing on 5 consecutive lots to again build the confidence that whatever process changes have been made by the vendor, they're actually suitable, and you are still going to meet all the parameters within the specification. This 5 number is again dependent on to organization to organization. Establish the trend for all these 5 lots and decide on possibility of then reduced testing. So in case if you still find that, okay, now the results are within the trend as like earlier results, and there is no risk going ahead for this skip testing, you can always do that. Now change in specification for already approved reduced testing product. So you have a specification set further, and then now you have a need of changing the specification. So what is going to happen in case of change in the limit for the test parameters, right? Are you going to make the limit stringent? So this can also comes under the change in the specification, adding a new test. So in case if there is a new test added, you can certainly not skip that test provided with the risk assessment. And in case if there is a chance of skipping the added test, you can justify based on to the proposal. Change in method of analysis can also bring the greater change, is a significant change, and you need to again understand whether the method of analysis are suitably validated or not. What is the impact of change onto the method of analysis for the coming batches? So all those aspects needs to be confirmed. Conduct complete testing on 5 consecutive lots with whatever changes you have done. Establish the trend and then decide onto the possibility of this reduced testing. So this is what I thought of, first sharing with you. I'm sure you must be having many questions, right? And I now open up the session for Q&A. So in case of any queries, please do raise your hand. In case if you have some additional information that is not been captured and covered so far, you are free to add those important points also.